5 days into the war, and the map of this conflict no longer fits inside the Middle East. What began in the Strait of Hormuz has reached European soil. A NATO ally's airbase has been struck by an Iranian drone for the first time since 1986. 700 ships are sitting immobile in the world's most critical waterway, and France has just done something that nobody in this conflict expected. Emmanuel Macron has deployed the Charles de Gaulle carrier strike group to the eastern Mediterranean. Europe's only nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, pulled urgently from NATO exercises in the Baltic Sea, is now heading toward the center of this crisis. And the decision changes the strategic picture in ways that Tehran, Washington, and every energy market on the planet is now being forced to recalculate. Let's start where everything turned upside down: the Strait of Hormuz. 5 days ago, this waterway was the primary choke point of the global energy supply. Today, it is a battlefield. Admiral Brad Cooper, commander of CENTCOM, confirmed that American forces have destroyed 17 Iranian warships as part of Operation Epic Fury, including the most capable operational Iranian submarine, which now, in his words, has a hole in its side. The Iranian Navy has been largely neutralized as a conventional fighting force. But neutralizing a navy and reopening a strait are two entirely different problems. Iran's response to losing its surface fleet was immediate and asymmetric. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy broadcast a direct warning on international frequencies. No ship of any type is permitted to pass through the Strait of Hormuz until further notice. And then they began enforcing it. Commercial tanker traffic fell by 80%. 700 ships are now anchored and immobile in the strait and its approaches, unable to move forward, unable to ensure their passage, waiting for a resolution that has not yet arrived. At least 3 commercial tankers have been damaged in Iranian attacks. 1 sailor has been killed. The economic consequences are already severe. Oil prices have surged to $82 per barrel. Qatar has completely halted operations at Ras Laffan, the world's largest liquefied natural gas production facility. Nearly 25% of global LNG passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Qatar Energy has announced the suspension of not just gas production, but all related industrial production, including urea, polymers, methanol, and aluminum. Iraq has been forced to halt production at Rumaila, the world's second-largest oil field, because storage facilities have reached capacity, removing 1.5 million barrels of daily production from global supply. Container shipping lines are rerouting through the Cape of Good Hope, adding weeks to transit times and enormous costs to global supply chains. And one of the ships struck in Iranian attacks belonged not to an enemy of Tehran, but to Russia. The Arctic Metagaz, an LNG tanker from Russia's sanctioned Shadow Fleet, was hit by unknown drones off the coast of Libya and caught fire. Iran has not confirmed responsibility, but the message the incident sends is unmistakable. When you close a strait and begin attacking ships indiscriminately, your definition of ally and enemy becomes difficult for anyone to trust. The moment the crisis crossed onto European soil came in the middle of the night on March 1st. A Shahed 136 kamikaze drone struck the runway of RAF Akrotiri in southern Cyprus, the United Kingdom's most strategically important Middle East base. Cyprus President Christodoulides confirmed the strike, describing the damage as limited and material. Limited damage or not, this was the first direct attack on British presence in Cyprus since 1986, and the first time an Iranian-linked drone had struck the territory of a European Union member state. The geographic boundary that had kept this conflict a regional crisis had just been crossed. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer condemned the attack as dangerous and indiscriminate. Britain responded by dispatching HMS Dragon, a Type 45 air defense destroyer, along with 2 Wildcat helicopters to reinforce the base. The RAF confirmed that F-35B jets had shot down an Iranian drone in Jordanian airspace and that an RAF Typhoon had destroyed an Iranian UAV heading toward Qatar. British countermeasures were active and effective, but the attack on Cyprus had done something that no amount of effective countermeasures could undo. It had made this conflict Europe's problem. Emmanuel Macron understood that immediately. On the evening of March 3rd, in a televised address to the French nation, Macron announced that the Charles de Gaulle and its accompanying carrier strike group had been urgently deployed to the Mediterranean. The ship had been participating in NATO exercises off the Swedish coast in the Baltic Sea. It was withdrawn from those exercises and redirected toward the eastern Mediterranean in a decision that Macron described as necessary to protect maritime traffic and European energy security. This is the first time Europe has intervened so directly and so materially in this conflict. The Charles de Gaulle is not a symbolic deployment. It is Europe's only nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. 30 Rafale M fighter jets on standby, a full carrier strike group including early warning aircraft and helicopters. Alongside the carrier, Macron announced the deployment of the Aquitaine-class frigate Languedoc, equipped with advanced anti-drone and anti-missile systems, which will conduct patrols in defense of Allied assets, including the British base in Cyprus. This deployment operates under the framework of the Strategic Partnership Agreement France signed with Cyprus in December 2025. What makes Macron's position uniquely complex is the contradiction at its center. In the same speech in which he announced this military deployment, the French president stated clearly that he considers the original American and Israeli strikes on Iran to be contrary to international law. France is simultaneously condemning the action that started this war and deploying a carrier strike group to manage the consequences of it. This is not inconsistency. It is France doing what France has always done within the NATO framework, maintaining an independent defense posture, asserting its role as a sovereign strategic actor, and inserting itself into the center of a crisis in a way that maximizes French influence regardless of which side is ultimately judged to have been right. Macron is not choosing between Washington and Tehran. He is choosing France. The French military presence in the region extends further than the Mediterranean deployment. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot confirmed that Rafale fighter jets have begun patrol flights over the United Arab Emirates and have shot down Iranian UAVs targeting French military facilities near Al Dhafra Air Base in Abu Dhabi. Aster missile batteries have been deployed. Anti-drone laser systems are operational. France is not observing this conflict. It is fighting in it on multiple fronts simultaneously, while publicly objecting to the conditions that created it. Greece has moved to support France's Mediterranean posture. Athens dispatched 2 frigates and 4 F-16 fighter jets to Cyprus, including the French-built FDI-class frigate HS Canaris. Greece's deployment solidifies European solidarity around Cyprus and brings the island under a more comprehensive NATO defense umbrella. Cyprus President Christodoulides welcomed the support while emphasizing clearly that Cyprus is not and will not be a party to the conflict itself. The Eastern Mediterranean is no longer an uncontested space. It is now covered by French carrier aviation, Greek surface combatants, British destroyers, and the political weight of European solidarity responding to the first drone strike on EU territory in this conflict. Now look at the economic picture, because this is where the war's consequences become personal for everyone watching. The Strait of Hormuz carries 20 million barrels of oil per day through 60 miles of water. 700 ships are currently sitting immobile, waiting to transit it. Qatar's LNG facility is shut down. Iraq's largest oil field has halted production. Insurance premiums in the Gulf have reached levels that make commercial shipping economically irrational for many operators. Container lines are adding weeks to transit times by rerouting around Africa. Iran's strategy is not mysterious. It is calculated and deliberate. Deploy cheap Shahed drones costing between $20,000 and $50,000 each against a defense architecture that responds with SM-6 missiles costing $4 to $5 million per shot. Force the United States and its allies into an exchange ratio that is economically unsustainable over time. Exhaust expensive interceptor magazines with cheap mass-produced weapons. Military experts estimate Iran still has between 2,000 and 2,500 ballistic missiles remaining, despite the destruction of hundreds of launchers during the February strikes. Iranian hypersonic missiles traveling at 9,000 to 11,000 miles per hour present an interception problem that cannot be solved from the defensive side. The only reliable answer is destroying the mobile launch vehicles before they fire, which requires persistent surveillance and rapid strike capability over vast areas of Iranian territory. Iran's drone stockpile runs into the tens of thousands. It is claimed that more than 1,200 projectiles were fired in just the first days of this conflict. The saturation strategy is working as designed. President Trump has responded with two commitments that together define the American approach to the Strait crisis: political risk insurance and financial security guarantees for maritime trade passing through the Gulf, and direct naval escort for tankers transiting the Strait of Hormuz when necessary. This second commitment implies a military operation to reopen the strait, one that B-52 and B-2 bombers are likely being considered for, given their capacity to destroy Iranian coastal missile batteries before they can be fired. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group is active in the Arabian Sea. 6 additional Arleigh Burke destroyers are on patrol. 9 to 13 warships total with Aegis combat systems capable of tracking hundreds of targets simultaneously. SM-6 missiles effective against cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and drones in their terminal phase. SM-2 for medium range, ESSM for close threats. Phalanx, CIUS, and electronic warfare as final defensive layers. In practical terms, several destroyers could form convoy escorts for 5 to 10 tankers at a time, with multiple convoys running per day. But with 700 ships queued and waiting, the math is slow, and the strategic cost of dedicating this naval force exclusively to escort duty is significant. 80 fighter jets across the American carriers in the region would shift from offensive strike capacity to defensive cover. Iran would see that shift, and Iran would draw conclusions from it. This is precisely why France sending the Charles de Gaulle to the Mediterranean is a strategic development that matters beyond its immediate defensive function. A European carrier strike group absorbing a portion of the defensive burden in the Mediterranean frees American assets to maintain offensive pressure elsewhere. It signals to Tehran that the coalition it is fighting is expanding rather than fracturing. And it demonstrates that the drone strike on Cyprus produced the opposite of the result Iran may have intended. Rather than intimidating Europe into pressuring Washington for restraint, it pulled the continent's most capable independent military power directly into the operational theater. The current picture is this: Iran is executing a saturation strategy with thousands of missiles and drones, accepting catastrophic naval losses in exchange for the economic damage it can inflict by keeping the Strait of Hormuz closed. The United States is balancing offensive pressure against Iran with the immediate practical necessity of reopening the world's most critical energy corridor. Britain is defending its Mediterranean assets and conducting active air defense operations across the theater. France has deployed its carrier and is fighting Iranian drones over the UAE while publicly objecting to the war's origins. Greece has reinforced Cyprus. 700 ships are waiting. Qatar's gas is not moving. The global food and manufacturing supply chains that depend on LNG, urea, and petrochemicals are already feeling the disruption. And the question that nobody in this conflict has yet answered is not whether the West has the military capacity to prevail. It almost certainly does. The question is whether it has the strategic patience to manage the cost of an asymmetric adversary that has decided if it is going down, it intends to take as much of the surrounding world with it as possible. France's arrival in the eastern Mediterranean suggests that Europe, at least, has decided that cost is no longer someone else's problem to manage alone. Whether that decision arrives in time to matter depends entirely on how many more ships Iran is willing to strike before the Charles de Gaulle reaches its operating position, and what Washington decides to do about 700 ships that cannot move and a world economy that cannot wait indefinitely for them.